Well, Ibrahim Halawa was 17 years old when he travelled to Egypt on a family holiday. And his family are originally from Egypt. So I suppose when a lot of the people who question in the media what Ibrahim was doing in Egypt at the time when he was arrested, it's no different than people who have relatives in America who come home to Ireland to spend the summer. So he travelled over after his leaving cert to Egypt with his family. And at the time, President Morsi, who was the first democratically elected president of Egypt, was overthrown by the military, and Sisi, who was the head of the military at the time. So Ibrahim Halawa, as I said, he was 17 and just done his leaving cert, has since found out, since his arrest, that he was accepted into engineering in Trinity. He's from Fair House in Tala, which is close to where I'm from myself. So basically, he's very much an Irish citizen and born in the Coombe, same as myself, lives in Tala, same as myself, went to school in a mainstream school and played GAA for a time, can speak Irish, actually used Irish to confer with the consulate at some of the prison visits. So travelled out, got caught up in the emotion, I suppose, of what was happening in Egypt at the time. And maybe it is naivety on his part, taking part in the protest. But he is, I suppose, reared, a product of where he was reared, and it's very common in Ireland to protest. We protest for Palestine on a regular basis. We protest, obviously, with the water at the moment, but, we're quite quick to take to the streets as a nation, and certainly he has said that is part of the reason why he felt compelled to go out and to take part in those protests, the pro-democracy protests. Unfortunately, they turned violent, and 97 people died on the day that Ibrahim was arrested. Most of those were protesters, and it was attributed to a very heavy-handed actions by both the police and the army. So Ibrahim and his three sisters took refuge in a mosque, along with thousands of others, and they were inside the internal part of the mosque at the time when they were arrested some hours later. And Amnesty International would have had eyewitnesses on the ground at the time of the protests, and they have categorically said that the part of the mosque where Ibrahim was arrested in and his sisters, there is absolutely no possibility that he could have carried out the subsequent charges that he now faces in prison in Egypt. So that's sort of the background to him. He was 17, as I said, when he was arrested. He's now spent 2 years and 4 months in prison without a trial. He has seen his lawyer once in that time, and he is not able to testify in court. He is being tried with 493 other individuals, all captured at the same time inside that mosque. They cannot hear the proceedings in the trial. So 12 times now the trial has attempted to start and then has been postponed over the last 2 years. Each time, Ibrahim and his 490 other co-defendants are brought from the prison into specially built courthouses, which has a glass wall that prevents them from hearing what's happening inside the courthouse, but that they can actually see the proceedings. So this doesn't stand up, I suppose, to anybody's standard internationally as to what constitutes a fair trial. And that's part of the reason why I suppose I got involved in the campaign. The fact that he was 17, he was a minor, he shouldn't be in prison at all. It's what they refer to in legal terms as arbitrary detention. And for 2 years and 4 months, that's a violation of international law. But this idea, I suppose people are saying, well, he needs to have a fair trial and, he should be tried. There's no possibility of him having a fair trial. Absolutely none. You cannot have a fair trial where you're being tried with 490 other people, where you can't testify, where you can't hear the evidence that's being given against you, where you can't meet your lawyer to give your side of the story. So that's sort of the situation as it stands with Ibrahim. He has embarked on a hunger strike, and from all accounts is still on that hunger strike. And I suppose it's a hunger strike that another prisoner took part in, Mohammed Sultan, who was also very young and was arrested because they were looking for his father and they arrested him instead. And it's a hunger strike where you slowly phase out food. So it does take longer for the very bad effects on your health to take place. But Ibrahim is embarking on that type of a hunger strike and is still on it to this day. I was out with him in August last year, and I visited him in the prison. And I have to say, I'm very concerned for his welfare. He's quite a tall individual, quite well built, and that's part of the reason both Amnesty and Reprieve believe he was arrested and why he's been detained is because he didn't look 17. But he was struggling to breathe, and he was telling us the conditions he's in that prison, where he shares a cell with 12 other prisoners. They are in that cell 24 hours a day. There's no physical activity, there's no fresh air, there's no windows, there's no shower in the cell, there's no toilet, it's just a hole in the ground. They have cold water to wash themselves. They're not permitted to have soap or anything like toiletries. They all sleep on the floor, and only, I think in July, prior to that visit, Ibrahim had a yoga mat brought in on the request of his family by the Irish consulate, and he sleeps on that. But that's sort of the conditions he's in as well, which I think it's important for people to know, because most people think of a prison, an Irish prison, and while we have problems with our Irish prisons, they're nothing like the conditions that Ibrahim is in. And even when I was stood outside the prison over there, lots of families came up and asked, were we here from a human rights organisation? And if we were, could we go back and tell the world what's happening in Egypt at the moment with the prison conditions, with the locking up of anybody who's a dissenting voice to President Sisi. He also detailed the torture that takes place within the prison, that he wakes up every morning to hearing people screaming, and that he has been beaten, probably not what would constitute torture, but that he has been physically beaten on a number of occasions with chains, with rubber poles, which he pointed to at the time when we had the visit, that was one of the poles that they would use because it doesn't leave very many marks on your body, so that when you have a visit then with the Irish consulate, there's very little physical evidence to show that you've been beaten. But other prisoners would have had much worse treatment. They'd have their tops taken off and water thrown on them and electric wires held to them. So that's the type of treatment that's happening in the prison. So I think the most recent postponement of his trial in January to March 6th, which is a long way away, I can't imagine what that's done to his mental health. And my concern is that I don't think he'll last much longer mentally without some very serious damage to his mental health, because I've received letters from him and you can see it's certainly a progression, that he's getting a lot more downbeat as each letter comes out of the prison. Well, when I embarked on the campaign for Ibrahim, I was concerned about whether or not raising it publicly would put him at risk, and it was only with the consent of both his family and with human rights NGOs that I did then speak publicly on it, because they believed that particularly in the Middle East, it's important to speak out publicly on these cases. So Ibrahim told me firsthand in August when I met him in prison that he was convinced that the public campaign is keeping him safe, and that's why he hasn't had the electric treatment, shock treatment, why he hasn't been tortured. That the prison warders would say to him, you think you're something special because you're Irish. So that was comforting for me, knowing that the resolution in the European Parliament came about partly because I brought a delegation to Brussels. Both the family, Ibrahim's lawyers, his legal team in Ireland, the lawyer that represented Peter Greste, in his case the Al Jazeera journalist, which a lot of people are familiar with, also the lawyers both the barristers who both represent Ibrahim, but also Mohammed Fahmy, who is another Al Jazeera journalist, a Canadian national. I brought them all together, and NGOs, and Ibrahim's school teacher, and anyone who was really interested in the campaign. And the idea was that let's sit around the table, let's raise his profile in Europe, but let's see if we can coordinate our efforts better to try and build his campaign and try and get Ibrahim home. And from that, we had a meeting with all of the Irish MEPs, and it was very comforting to see every Irish MEP were all concerned for Ibrahim's welfare and all agreed that if we could get a resolution to the agenda of the European Parliament, that they would do what they could to make that happen and to support it. And every single one of them stepped up to the mark on that. They lobbied within their own groups, because it would require a majority of groups to request that this topic be put on the agenda, and that happened. And in fact, we had also the support of the Greens, even though we don't have an Irish MEP in there. So we had the vast majority of the group support the putting it on the agenda. It also then, when it came to writing that resolution, we got a very, very strongly worded one, which I was surprised by, because a lot of the time in the Parliament things can be watered down because of political differences. It was a very, very strongly worded resolution which demanded Ibrahim be released immediately. It condemned the conditions he's been kept in. It condemned the fact that he's in arbitrary detention, and also all around the issues around the trial and how it doesn't constitute a fair trial. And that passed by an overwhelming majority. So 566 MEPs voted in favour and only 11 abstained, and they were 11 from the very extreme right of the European Parliament. So I think it's a really positive step. I would like to see the Dáil do the same. I'd like to see them put their political differences aside and rally around Ibrahim, because one of the significant things that came from the resolution, while the Egyptian authorities came out quite publicly and said that they'd seen it as a violation or an interference in their independent judicial process, we know for a fact that on Egyptian state TV, the commentators were discussing, would it be better to just release Ibrahim rather than drawing all of this negative attention to the country? And that's a significant shift. If the public starts talking about that in Egypt, then there's a good chance that it's just, let's get him out. And we know that was the case with Peter Greste. He was becoming a headache for the Egyptian authorities. And in order to save face, that's where the presidential decree came in. So President Sisi wrote into law a decree which said that anyone who is a foreign national who is either accused of or sentenced of a crime in Egypt could either be tried in their own country or serve out the sentence. And that was very much just to get rid of the problem that was Peter Greste. And we believe that that now should apply to Ibrahim as well. And it would save face for everybody and see him released.
What do you say about the Irish government's opinion that that decree cannot be applied until a trial has taken place?
I can understand that it's politically more problematic for anybody. It's easier if Ibrahim is sentenced, then the president can say, well, the court has been allowed to do its role and we can now pardon him or send him home to serve out his sentence. Absolutely. It's more difficult politically to make the case. But we know for a fact that Peter Greste was not sentenced at the point when he was released. He was charged and he was in the trial process. And one of the things is that they wear a white uniform in prison when you're on remand, and that changes then when you're sentenced. Peter Greste was wearing white and Ibrahim is wearing white. So the circumstances are the same. What it requires is a very concerted political campaign, both behind the scenes and publicly, to force the hand of the Egyptians. So I'm not in any way dismissing that it wouldn't be difficult, but it's not impossible. And I think if the political will was there to pursue that and to keep pushing for Ibrahim to have the same rules applied to him as Peter Greste had. What I'd love is more young people to come on board and support Ibrahim's campaign, because I think if anybody could put themselves in his shoes, as I said, he was ready to start college. He was meant to go to Spain with his friends and decided to go to Egypt with his family on the annual family holiday. And it's those little decisions that we all make that can fundamentally change your life. So I think for young people to get involved and to just, as I said, put themselves in Ibrahim's shoes, he should be at home, he should be in college. I would ask them to take to social media. There is a hashtag, it's Free Ibrahim. And to use that on a regular basis and to keep him in the agenda, because we know that the Egyptian authorities are monitoring the social media and we need public voices out there. And also to write to the Egyptian ambassador in Dublin and also to Charlie Flanagan, because I think it is important that people know that there is a public campaign out there. And the most recent letter I received from Ibrahim was on the back of him hearing about the resolution passing, but also about the birthday card campaign that we did. And that was a non-political birthday card that was very carefully thought out by the campaign, that everything was bilingual, to maximise the chances of it getting into the prison. And it was a very simple message, just happy birthday, Ibrahim, and just want you to know we're thinking of you. And people had just to sign that. And we know they got into the prison to him, and it meant a huge amount to him, because in his last letter he said he feels in limbo. He was always thought of himself as Irish Egyptian. He's in Egypt. He said, living in the cell in the prison, he doesn't identify with the culture that he's experiencing, but the longer he's there, the more isolated he's feeling from his Irish culture. And to receive the birthday cards and to see them coming in their thousands from people back home really lifted his spirits and made him realise that we haven't forgotten him, you know, that he is our Ibrahim and we need to bring him home. And so I would ask people to just do whatever they can to highlight it. Talk to your friends about it. You know, dismiss the rumours that are out there also, which is really important, because Ibrahim has been accused of burning his passport, of ripping up his passport. I think he's done everything to his passport at this stage, according to some trolls on Twitter. Ibrahim was arrested with his Irish passport on him, and that's why he has consular assistance. So that is not true. Videos that have been put up are of different Ibrahims in London. They're not even him. So there's a concerted campaign out there to try and muddy the waters around this. But I would ask people to talk to your friends, to dispel those rumours. He took part in a protest, no different than anybody else could have done on being in Egypt at the time. And he's paying a very, very dear price for that. And I think that he's long overdue that he should be at home.